before we knew it, we found ourselves spending springs up in Alaska and Canada in the coastal range, which were just they're the most beastly peaks in the world because you've got horrendous weather, and we realized that we had a unique ability to excel at survival. That trip literally cemented in our minds that we wanted to try and take skiing to the ultimate level, which was the 8,000 meter arena. And only a dozen people had ever skied from those altitudes. And it was a huge feather because it was the first time any American had ever skied from an 8,000 meter peak, North or South America. So we come up with this harebrained idea that we're going to go with a relatively small team. We don't use any oxygen. We don't use any Sherpa. We don't use any drugs. We decide then and there that we're going to go to try and climb and ski Mount Everest. And it kind of depicts part of the problem of obsession, because obsession is an enormously powerful tool to achieve goals. But the problem is that goals are really kind of a wish, and they wouldn't be worth setting if they didn't have just as good a chance of failure as success.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the Life Edge podcast today. I want to introduce our special guest, Mike Marolt. So, Mike, why don't you go ahead and start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a fourth-generation Aspenite, so I live here in Aspen, Colorado, and come from a skiing family. My uncles and my dad were all Olympic skiers, and I never aspired to their level of ski racing, but in the process found my niche, which is high-altitude skiing. But I'm married. I have two daughters that we adopted about 20 years ago. And by trade, I'm a certified public accountant. So just here in Aspen, my whole family is still in the valley, and we're just kind of living the dream, as they say.
So you and I had chatted before this podcast and this interview, and you had a really interesting concept that you wanted to share with the listeners that I felt tied in really well with our audience and what it is that we're trying to get out to our audience as far as in the line of just bettering yourself and education and personal growth. And you really wanted to talk about this concept of passion versus obsession. So why don't you go ahead and start us off a little bit with that?
Well, I think that what happened in my life, you don't realize the changes that you go through in your life automatically. And several years ago, I started to write a book, and it's called Natural Progression: A Lifetime of Skiing the World's Greatest Ranges. And really what it was is starting at literally age 12, when I did my first backcountry ski excursion with my dad, and it carried through to about 3 or 4 years ago. And I gave the book to my editor, and he said, "Wow, that was really cool how you crafted that personal growth into the story." And I can't take credit for that. I just wrote the story. But he started to explain. He goes, it's really interesting, especially when you contrast your story in the world of adventure sports and pop culture, extreme sports. He said it really, you could see an enormous amount of growth from when you were young to today. And I started to think about that, and I started to kind of reflect on who I was back when I started, especially when I started to achieve success in my mid to late 20s in the sport. And sure enough, those threads were very evident in that book, and it made me start to think. And if I can digress just a bit, as I was growing up, my father, Max Marolt, who died about 20 years ago, but he was an Olympic ski racer, and he used to just always have these words of wisdom, and I never really understood those words. And basically, I remember some of the last words that he said to me. He said, "Mike, some people obtain the gift to ski in the Olympics like me. Other people obtain the gifts to hit a fastball out of Yankee Stadium. And he said, you guys were given the gifts that allowed you to climb and ski where not a lot of people have or not a lot of people can. And he said, that helped you develop passion to just take your skiing as far as you could. And he said the problem in a lot of people's lives is they fail to recognize the gifts that they've been given, because everybody has been given gifts. And so he said he always talked about the seeking. And then you correlate that into some of the issues that he had with regards to, being an Olympian and, being a passionate skier. And he used to always tell the story about how he made the Olympics in 1956, but the week before the Olympics, he broke his leg. And so, in a sense, his initial love for skiing allowed him to become an Olympian, but he didn't actually get to ski in those Olympic Games. So from 1956 until 1960, he developed an obsession not to be an Olympian, because he had kind of already done that. He developed this obsession to not only make the Olympic team in 1960, but to win a medal. And when you look at the language that he used in describing that, he sacrificed everything. He sacrificed personal relationships. Nothing got in his way. And that kind of depicts part of the problem of obsession, because obsession is an enormously powerful tool to achieve goals. But the problem is that goals are really kind of a wish, and they wouldn't be worth setting if they didn't have just as good a chance of failure as success. And so back to his story, he worked hard, and by the time the Olympics rolled around, he was skiing top 5 in the world. He was profiled in Sports Illustrated, and he was really on top of his game. Well, the short version is that he got to the Olympics and he failed. He did not win the medal. And it really was devastating for him. And he started to develop a chip on his shoulder, and he started to really beat himself up. If I only would have worked harder, if I only would have done this, whatever. But as a little kid who worshiped his dad, and my dad was my idol. He was a great dad, but he was also an idol. Oftentimes I would hear him talk about, my entire ski racing career was a complete waste of talent. That was really, really hard for a little kid to accept. And over the course of his life, he actually stopped skiing altogether. And then when we were little kids, he was a traveling salesman and a coach. He came home, and that's when his transformation happened. He came home. My mom was basically a single mother. She had, my brother and I were just toddlers. My older brother and sister were, 4 or 5 years old, whatever. And she was just literally pulling her hair out. And he said, oh my God. And I've heard him tell this story. He said, oh my God, I just said, I got to, get these kids out of the house. So he defaulted to what he knew, skiing. And he dusted his skis off, and he took us out, and he really enjoyed it. And he would often take us out as little kids up onto the ski lifts on mountain skiing. And then when we were 12, he introduced us to the backcountry. But the point that I'm trying to make is that he had a moment in his life where he had moderated, he quit skiing, and then there was some other force that allowed him to get the skis out and to go skiing. For the first time in a long time, his motivation to ski was something other than himself. And that just kept manifesting and manifesting by taking the kids out, taking, my mom out, until the year before he died. I was on the lift with him, and I was 35, so I was an adult. And he mumbled almost to nobody, but to me, he said, Mike, if I would have had the passion to ski that I have today back then, I would have won that medal. And I never really understood that, but that was quite a transformation from the pitfalls of being obsessed and how devastating it is. It was so devastating that not only did he quit the sport, he failed to realize that he had 2 top 20 finishes in an Olympic games. He failed to realize that he was an Olympian, and it's just if you're obsessed and you don't attain your goal, you blame yourself. You think you're in it alone, and that was really devastating for him. But he transformed as soon as he stepped back, and he started to ski for his family. And so that was a kind of a micro example of his transformation. And I always remember that. And when I was sitting on the lift with him that day, and I coupled that with seek, find your gifts, I knew that there was something going on there. And he was just such a wise guy. I mean, he just really was practical and one of those guys that was just kind of a practical genius about life in general. And so that was where the roots of trying to discover gifts and all these concepts that a young person really, it just kind of goes over your head and you just think, oh, that's just dad. So, but he planted the seeds for us, and then we fell in love with skiing as well. And but that's one example of it. Then I started to look at my career and the thread in that book, and I had a similar moment to that in my career.
I love that story you just shared with your dad. I think a lot of people can relate. The question I have for you in the similar vein was how did obsession drive you?
Yeah, and I think that, he planted the seeds in us by taking us out skiing. And I think initially when people get exposed to certain activities, I don't necessarily think you just fall into passion. We loved skiing. And we often laugh that, starting in about middle school, 5th grade, my brother, I have a twin brother, identical twin brother, who's also my climbing partner. And then I have an older brother. And from the time that we entered middle school until we got through, basically college, if there was a moment where we didn't have school, we were on that ski hill. So we're developing this love of this activity called skiing. And that started because of Dad. And then, we got through high school and we carried on with our lives. We had developed this passion to get into the backcountry at age 12. Dad was responsible, and he loaded us up in the car, and he took us to a local mountain where there were no lifts or anything in the middle of summer. And I remember we were at dinner. It was actually July 3rd, and the slope that he wanted to take us to actually had a name called July 4th because it was off of a 13,000-foot peak, and it was a place where a few people would go and get the last turns of the season skiing in the summer. The lifts close in April. And so he said, load up the station wagon, we're going skiing. So we're looking at him, we're playing baseball and, messing around in the 80-degree sun. It's like, Dad's losing his mind. But we did it. And he took us up there, and that's where the seeds were planted for what would ultimately become my passion. Then we turned 16. Dad helped us fix up an old Willys Jeep, a 1948 Willys Jeep. And from the time the lifts closed until they opened, we were using that Jeep to access peaks and to ski, on our own. And that carried forward. And then after college, we all migrated back to Aspen. And we picked up that love of backcountry skiing again. And by this time, we all had jobs, had a little bit of money to afford doing some more exotic things. So we decided to go up into the Pacific Northwest on peaks like Rainier and some of the volcanoes up there. We slowly started to realize that we had a knack for this stuff. We were very good endurance athletes, and one thing led to another. Before we knew it, we found ourselves spending springs up in Alaska and Canada in the coastal range, which were just they're the most beastly peaks in the world because you've got horrendous weather, and we realized that we had a unique ability to excel at survival, if nothing else. We got a little taste of altitude on Denali, which is 20,000 feet. And then the next step was we started heading into the 6,000, 20,000 foot peak, 6,000 meters, 20,000 foot peaks in South America. And then by 1997, we found ourselves heading into Asia, which is where the Himalaya are. So we had spent about 10 years just slowly progressing, and we found ourselves on Broad Peak, and that's one of the 14 8,000 meter peaks. There's 14 8,000 meter peaks, 8,000 meters being about 26,300 feet. There's 14 of those, and that's kind of the benchmark for high altitude climbing, where high altitude mountaineers go for the highest peaks in the world. And we didn't take our skis on that trip. We were humble enough to realize, well, this is a pretty big deal, just climbing an 8,000 meter peak. So we didn't take the skis, but on that peak, the slopes were just magnificent. And my brother and I were just whispering back and forth, why didn't we bring the skis? We could do it. But we started to realize our gift through that process, that we had a knack for climbing at altitude. It was a gift. We had the physiology to excel at altitude. We would look around and other people were not doing so well, and we were having a great time. That trip literally cemented in our minds that we wanted to try and take skiing to the ultimate level, which was the 8,000 meter arena. And only a dozen people had ever skied from those altitudes. But in the process of developing these gifts, finding these gifts and developing them, we gained a little bit of notoriety. And that kind of pumped up our egos. And we were just young. And people started to notice us. So we decided that we were going to go and climb and ski a peak in Tibet called Shishapangma, which is just over 8,000 meters. And by and large, 99% of all the people supported us. But there was 1%. There's always that 1%. And for whatever reason, human beings are, I've heard the term, the quote, that human beings are designed to survive and not thrive. And that's an evolution thing that we can get into, but we concentrate on the negative. 1% of the voice was negative. They didn't think we could do it. That was right at the advent of the internet. There was only one adventure website, and some clown on the internet started really critiquing us, and he put a betting pool on the website that people could take bets on our demise. And this really kind of, it upset us. We were young. We didn't know how to handle it. So we started to fight back. 99% of the people are supporting us. Everybody thinks it's wonderful. Be safe, have fun. 1% starts putting a shadow of doubt in our minds. And instead of listening and soaking in the positive vibes from 99%, we concentrated on the 1%. And we started to develop a chip on our shoulder. Well, lo and behold, we go to that peak. Our intentions were just to ski on the peak. Well, we pulled it off. And it was a huge feather because it was the first time any American had ever skied from an 8,000 meter peak, North or South America. So we got back, and the limelight just started to flood on us. They did a film on us, and we were profiled in all the adventure magazines, Outside Magazine, National Geographic, all the ski magazines. Well, you can imagine for a young guy, 30 years old, that starts to impact your head, and it starts to really build up your ego. And the 1% of the naysayers started to critique even that success. Oh, they got lucky. They're one-hit wonders. And bluntly, it completely pissed us off. So we're developing ego, And we are developing an obsession to prove these people wrong. So we come up with this harebrained idea that we're going to go with a relatively small team. We don't use any oxygen. We don't use any Sherpa. We don't use any drugs. We decide then and there that we're going to go to try and climb and ski Mount Everest. So we put the expedition together. We knew it was going to take a few years. But by 2003, 3 years after we were successful on Shishapangma, we found ourselves at the base camp of the north side of Everest. And we weren't going to go to the south side because the north side was harder. We were stacking the cards in our favor, and we were just obsessed. I can remember just being so obsessed about proving people wrong. Well, you can probably guess the result of that expedition. We got caught in a storm, didn't get to the top, and when we came off that peak, we were just devastated. And for the first time in my life, I could understand how Dad could be an Olympian and think my entire ski racing career was a complete waste of talent. We felt like failures. We felt defeated. It was a horrible, horrible ride home. And in that discouraged state of mind, we failed to realize, number one, we attempted Everest pure style, which is a monumental task. But at that time, because so few people were skiing from those altitudes, we failed to realize that we did climb to 25,500 feet, and we skied the North Ridge of Everest. And it was only the second time that it had ever been done, and it was the first time an American had ever done it. It just completely... We were so devastated because we didn't get the medal, we didn't hit the summit, that it just destroyed us. And we didn't realize the accomplishment. I mean, and back then in 2003, if anybody would have skied from 25,500 feet on any peak other than the face of Everest, it would have been headline news. It took us 6 months to realize what we had accomplished. But that led to my transformation too, because when I got off that peak, I was discouraged. I didn't want to quit, but I was tired from fighting the battle of my ego, but we needed to do something to soothe our wounds. So I found a peak 6 months later. It was the highest peak in Bolivia, called Sahama. It's about 22,000 feet. And I said, Steve and Jim, we got to soothe these wounds. We got to just go and climb up something and ski down it. So we put the expedition together, and I'm telling you, we went to Bolivia. We drove out onto the Punta Atacama Desert, and this peak just sticks up out of nowhere, 22,000 feet. It's not buried in a range, and you've got this beautiful desert spread around the bottom of it. No people. It's about 50 degrees at the base, blue sky. I mean, there's nothing more enticing for a ski mountaineer. And when I put that pack on to walk into that peak, those pack straps dug into my shoulders, and I wanted to be any place but where I was. Steve and Jim twisted my arm, let's just go. So we got to the base a day later, and I'm looking up at this route, and it's about 1,500 feet of just pure water ice from runoff. And it's at about 45 or 50 degrees. And I'm looking at it, and the pack straps are digging in, and I'm going, that is going to be so difficult. That is going to be so dangerous. But on top of it, at that altitude, there just wasn't any snow. I didn't think I was going to get a ski out of it. The other conflicting issues I had, nobody had ever heard of this peak, even in our world, ski mountaineering. It was an unknown peak, despite being the highest in Bolivia. I didn't see an opportunity, even if I was successful, to prove the naysayers wrong. My obsession was so strong that I didn't see any value in this peak. So I looked at Steve and Jim. They're putting their gear on. They're putting their crampons on and their harnesses. They're getting the rope out. And I said, guys, I'm done. And they didn't say a word. They didn't twist my arm. They just kept putting their gear on. I said, I'm out of here. Turned around, started to walk away. Get about a quarter mile out, I look back and I see these two dots climbing up this steep face. I walk a little bit further. I'm seething that they didn't try and twist my arm into doing it. But I get a little bit further out and they're a little bit higher. And then the same type of situation happened to me that happened to my dad. I thought, oh my God, what if one of those guys, my twin brother and my best friend, what if one of those guys gets hurt up there, or God forbid even killed, because I wasn't there to prevent something? So I immediately turned around, went back to that peak, put all my gear on, and I started to climb. And a funny thing happened to me when I got up. I noticed the blue sky. I noticed the beauty of the desert. And I really started to enjoy the climbing for exactly and only what it was. And it energized me. And I climbed so fast that I caught up to those guys. And the short story is, we had a beautiful camp on the peak. We got to the top. We skied down it. And it was a monumental accomplishment because only one other person had ever climbed and skied that peak. It was the first time an American had ever done it. But none of that stuff mattered. I didn't care about what the naysayers thought. I didn't care about where the peak was. I didn't care about how high it was. I was just experiencing this wellness and this happiness. And I knew something happened, but I wasn't quite sure at the time. And I also developed this mantra that I would carry with me for the rest of my career. And it was, from now on, I'm going to be the best damn teammate that I can possibly be. And that was the philosophy that I took on every climb after that. And my career, I was successful to that point. But my career after that point was where all of my major personal successes occurred. And they were not successes necessarily that pop culture would understand or appreciate, but it didn't matter because I knew that I had really catapulted myself to the next level, and all the sacrificing, all the hard work became just a labor of love. But the other cool thing that happened is Steve and Jim also saw the transformation, and they were just kind of blown away at how this mantra of being the best teammate ever, carrying loads when people were not well, just doing the little extra things to help my team get to the top. It was contagious, and they started to develop. It's pretty hard to be on a 3-man team or any team and see one guy who's just doing everything he can for success. It's impossible to see that and not reciprocate it. So that was the transformation, and it was now retrospectively looking back and listening to those words of wisdom from my father, I started to connect the dots, and I started to come to this realization that there's a difference between obsession and passion. And even in my career as a CPA, I look at clients and I see the ones that are obsessed and I see the ones that are really passionate. And there's a huge difference. And it's just a way healthier way to approach life. Passion, once you obtain it, it's healthy from the perspective that it allows you to live in the moment and to take even failures as a source of allowing yourself to overcome hurdles that you couldn't get over, or to fix problems and mistakes that you made to become better in the moment. But the overall best part of passion is that you try to live where your feet are and you try to be the best at whatever you're doing that you can possibly be. And it eliminated the white noise of that 1%. It also, in a strange way, neutralized the kudos and the props that you got from the 99%, because if you're not careful, when people are blowing you up and saying you're great and that's so amazing, that feeds into your ego, and it's really a source of obsession. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell, but that's the the story of how it really, it really became a topic over the last several years that I'm interested in pursuing and sharing with people so that they can better understand it. And I guess it leads to the next question. Well, okay, there's a difference. Clearly, there's a difference between obsession and passion. And my big question was, is it possible to coach that? And over the last couple of years, I'm convinced that it is.
So I have a couple of questions. The first one is, up until you reached the fame status, in a sense, was obsession driving you, or was it just the enjoyment of climbing and skiing the peaks?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think when people start out in anything that they really enjoy, it's not necessarily passion. And I correlate that into a concept that I got. Have you ever heard of the book Outliers, where it talks about the 10,000 hour rule? And the 10,000 hour rule is basically a rule that says if you want to become really good at something, if you want to become an expert, it's going to take you 10,000 hours. And I think initially when you start out, you're building that experience and you're really having fun and you're really enjoying it. And I think that as you become an expert, you run the risk of passing over that line where you're doing something because you enjoy it, to becoming more of an expert. And as you become an expert, that feeds your ego. You become proud. And proud always comes before the fall. And so it's a natural evolution to fall into obsession before you fall into passion.
Climbing is a very dangerous world, and there's always someone trying to take the gold ring to the next, or the brass ring to the next level. How many of these over the years, big tragedies in climbing, do you think came from somebody trying to silence that 1% rather than to them just truly enjoying, I'm going to conquer this hill or this mountain by free climbing it or speed climbing it or ice climbing, whatever the goal was? How often do you think people get pushed to their limit by the 1% that you experience, the negative 1%, rather than they're just out truly living their life the way they want to?
Well, I mean, that's a question that I get a lot, and it's a really good question. And I don't think you can quantify it. I think that in the discussion that I'm bringing to the table, what my goal is to get people individually to really evaluate themselves internally and to really think, what is motivating me? And it falls into the decision-making process, and it gets back to this notion that human beings through evolution are designed to survive and not thrive. And what happens in the decision-making process in the brain science is that when people are obsessed, they will use any means possible to attain their goal. And if that means is developing a chip on your shoulder, or let's be honest, just spite to prove people wrong, it really has a negative impact. And I think that when you step back and look at what obsession is, it really is a form of survival. I'm here, this is my goal, and I will do anything to attain that goal. And what happens in that process is you become hyper-focused on the goal. And really superficially, one of the reasons why you become fixated on that goal is this notion of survival. Your survival, even if it's on a subconscious level, is to obtain that goal. And whenever human beings are in a state of survival, the process in the brain starts to revolve around the hormones adrenaline and cortisol. Those things start pumping into you. And for example, cortisol is, by some experts, is called the dumb hormone. And it doesn't make you dumb, But what cortisol does in the brain is it allows you to hyper focus on everything you need to do to survive. And in this case, the survival is the goal. And that's the reason why when people become obsessed, it impacts their relationships. They start to ignore their spouse. They start to ignore their kids. They start to ignore anything that will get in the way because they've got this cortisol high going that is driving the adrenaline that's firing them up. So it's a really powerful tool to obtain goals. But in the decision-making process, I'll give you an example. We were on a peak in Bolivia several years ago, and I had been studying this brain science basically from some books that I read by a writer, an expert on the topic, Lawrence Gonzalez. And he talked about how when you're in a state of survival and you've got this biology going on in your head, it falls back on the fight or flight. And you have to do something to get out of that fight or flight mentality, and you have to start using your intellect. Fight or flight is emotional. I've got the goal, I will do anything. So we climbed up this route, and we got up to about halfway, and we look up, and there's this one lone figure going to the summit, thousands of feet above us. And at the same time, the clouds are blowing in. The wind is picking up. It's getting cold. It's late in the day. And we all immediately threw our packs down. We're gearing up. We're excited. We're going to get the summit today. And I had used a tool from these books that said, always plan out your adventure and have a little notebook in your pocket. And don't be afraid to deviate from that plan. But the basic gist of that little notebook, which I kept in a hip pocket, was to trigger your brain from that fight or flight survival mode into using your intellect to really evaluate it. So we're gearing up, and I happened to feel the notebook in my pocket, and I was just as gung-ho as the other guys to go. I pulled it out. I didn't even read it. It was just this little yellow spiral notebook. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute. And I said, guys, wait up. It's late in the day. The storm clouds are blowing in. And to get off this peak, we're going to have to do it in the dark. And it was a really exposed route that had a lot of places where you could literally fall off the peak. And all of a sudden, they switched into their intellect. And they said, oh, wow. Jim even said it, I didn't even think of that. So we used our intellect to get back to a more reasonable approach. And we said, well, let's go down and we'll wait a couple days and then we'll come back up and do it right. So getting back to your question, does this have an impact? Does obsession have an impact on a lot of the tragedies that happen out there? I can't quantify it, but I know in my own experience, absolutely. Absolutely. It's really the study, according to these books that I read, he even titles it. It's the study of how enormously experienced people can make really stupid mistakes. And it all falls back to this, human beings are designed to survive versus thrive. So the key then becomes transforming into something that is not natural for humans through evolution to use their intellect as well as their emotions.
You had the shift at the base of that mountain, watching your team climb up without you. What would have been, so somebody who hasn't gone through that transition yet, what are some of the red flags or things that they can realize in their own life, whether it be in business, sports, relationships? Because this translates into everything else. This isn't just in, exactly. And so what are some of the ways that people can maybe notice it and address that situation from switching from obsession into passion a lot sooner?
Well, I mean, the warning signs are kind of natural. For Dad, he was just so dejected that he quit skiing. I think that if you're fortunate enough to not get in too deep, the situation just manifests itself in a desire to not do the activity that you're doing. And for me personally, when I got to the base of that peak, I mean, you just cannot imagine how tired I was mentally. And when people are fighting these battles of their ego, it takes an enormous amount of energy, and it takes a toll physically. You know, when you're living in that constant state of having cortisol running through your body and adrenaline, it tires you out. And as a matter of fact, cortisol is a very toxic hormone. I mean, if you could inject it into your body, it could kill you. I mean, it's not a healthy hormone. And so I think that the warning signs are just lack of interest. Are you still engaged in this? Do you still enjoy doing it? Or are you just forcing yourself to do it because you're obsessed? You know, I use the story. I had a client, and in ski country like Aspen, if you ski 100 days, when you go through the ticket counter and it registers as your 100th day, the lift attendant will give you a pin. And it's a huge source of pride. But people around here just get obsessed because it's not easy to ski 100 days a year. And I had this client, and it was during COVID, and he called me up and he said, well, I've got COVID. And I said, it's too bad, you know, whatever. And so a couple days later, I had a question for him, and I said, so do you have time to talk? He goes, well, actually, I'm just heading out the door. And I said, well, where are you going, to the hospital or something? He goes, no, I'm going skiing. I said, you got COVID and you're going skiing? He said, well, yeah, I did the calculations, and by the end of the year, I can only afford to miss so many days. And if I just ski one day while I have COVID, I can do this. I can still pull it off. It's like, so the guy went out skiing and then got so sick that he missed the rest of the season. So it's, you know, you got to look at the warning signs, and it's just really just how you feel and how you honestly look at the activity. I mean, do you really want to do this, or are you just doing it despite everything in your body telling you you shouldn't? So, you know, the warning signs are just fatigue and just lack of interest. And if you have that, you know, obsessed people will overcome the lack of interest because they're obsessed, but it's just step back. And so I think one of the tools, there are three elements that are really important in making the pivot from being obsessed to being passionate. And one of them is moderating. It's just moderating. It's stepping back and what's going on around me? I've got COVID. Does it really make sense to go up skiing? You know, it's late in the day. I mean, the storm clouds are blowing in. Does it really make sense to go further up? So it's you know, and we can get into the how I pivot. You know, I didn't pivot from obsession to passion by choice. So the good news is that I do think people get to a point where they have to make a decision. And moderating is the first step in making a really good decision. Do I want to pursue this or don't I?
When you finally made that transition to, I'm not doing this anymore for this obsession to get this chip off my shoulder. I'm doing it to be the best teammate that I can be. I'm doing this because I enjoy this and I enjoy skiing down the hill with those guys. You talked about how you had all this extra energy, all like the floodgates opened up. What do you think how do you think people can get to that part sooner? Because obsession it will push you into doing some crazy things. But on the other side of that, when you hit the true passion and when you truly understand what you're doing, and why you're doing it, it's a whole new world.
Well, and I didn't, like I said in the story, I didn't know what happened. I didn't know why I felt so good. Well, it gets back to the brain science. I shifted from being in an adrenaline state to having all of the positive hormones literally flowing through my blood. The serotonin and all of the hormones that make you feel good. And how do you do it? You have to understand that there was biology going on there. And so when you look at, okay, I know now what creates the negative hormones, what creates the good hormones. And the number one thing is to love other human beings and to help other human beings. And high up on the list is also problem solving. Problem solving is one of the greatest ways to experience that overall well-being, the feelings of well-being. And I know that when I was up there on that peak, I was experiencing that because it was so drastic. I mean, I literally was so consciously aware of the fact that, pardon the French, I didn't give a shit about anything except what I was doing. And it was driven by wanting to basically, to distill it, to make sure that the problem of my brother and my best friend possibly getting hurt or even killed was solved. So, into your question, what can people do to make the pivot? The first one is you got to understand moderation. And I believe that people need to moderate, consciously moderate in activities that they're just totally into. And it's such a drastic and important step that when I'm talking to young people who are heading out into the backcountry, to ski powder, which is inherently dangerous because of avalanches, I bet them, I put them to the test at least one time a year when it looks safe, it's perfect, it's just everything is the arrow's pointing to go. If you want to become a truly seasoned mountaineer, every now and then you got to just walk away. You have got to teach yourself that it's okay to walk away. And that's the lesson that I learned on that peak. It was okay that I did that. The mountain's going to be there tomorrow. The mountain's going to be there the next day. Moderation is something that you need to practice. I'm not suggesting that you got to quit. I mean, I basically quit. Dad basically quit. I'm not saying you got to quit, but you got to just learn how to develop the skill set to step back and say, not today. So moderation is one of the key elements. The other elements are humility and gratitude. And I'll start off with gratitude first. What I tell clients and what I tell people that are getting involved in this sport is you have got to develop gratitude for even the mundane in your life. And the reason why you have to develop that is because if you can be absolutely conscious and thankful for the ability to do something as mundane as going to your sink and filling up a glass of water that's purified and drinking it. Or like I was coming out of the supermarket in my car the other day, and it was a new roundabout. And I was like consciously thankful for the yellow lines that guided me around the roundabout. And the reason why you got to develop that gratitude is because when those big gifts come along, you're going to know that there's going to be contrast. You're going to know that this is unique to me. I mean, when I'm up there climbing on Broad Peak at 26,000 feet, it's like, oh my God, I'm pretty damn good at this. That gift came across my table and I knew it. So develop gratitude for everything. And gratitude is another way that we break from the humans are made to survive to humans are made to thrive. Being grateful is a super high on the list way to develop the well-being hormones. So develop gratitude for everything, and you will understand when the gifts you've been presented come your way. And the second thing is humility. And you have to, in order to have true gratitude for all of the mundane and all of the gifts that come your way, I think that you need to have an element of humility that stems from the fact that when you look at all of creation, go back to the Big Bang. Through the process of evolution, the Big Bang, I mean, the one undisputed fact that nobody can argue is I exist. And so, I'm Christian, and so I believe it's a God thing. Maybe you believe it's karma, maybe you believe it's Mother Nature, whatever. The fact of the matter is that you exist. And I also believe that in the scheme of everything, every human being on the face of the earth has a purpose. Everybody plays a role in the cog of human nature. And I believe that whatever created us, in my terms, God, I believe that he presents all the gifts. Now, I also believe that we have free will. So we can choose to grab those gifts and to seek those gifts using the language of my dad. Or we can just go about our lives and just accept it the way that it is. But everything has been given to us. We have all the gifts and we have a mission. And if it takes an enormous amount of humility to accept that. And part of the problem of obsession is when you're living in a state of obsession, you believe that you're controlling your destiny. You believe that if I didn't win the medal, I didn't work hard enough. I got to work harder. You believe that you are in control. And I believe that through passion, you understand that, yeah, I still set goals, but I believe that it is up to me to find the gifts and along with the gratitude, accept failures as a gift. When you're in a state of obsession and a hurdle comes up, you get angry. Why me? Why did that happen to me? Why did I fall in the ski race? Why did the weather come in? You start to put the weight of the world on your shoulders. When you're living in a state of passion, you understand that if there's a hurdle that comes in your way, or if you make a mistake, you have gratitude for that because it allows you the opportunity to fix mistakes that you made, to eliminate errors that you made, but also to figure out how to overcome the hurdle that prevented you from obtaining the goal. So at the end of the day, relating it back to the 10,000 hour rule, and I noticed this when I watched the Olympics. You watch the profiles, these kids start out when they're little and they start to fixate on the Olympics and they spend a huge amount of their lives in terms of their age, their entire lives, obsessing about this goal. And you listen to the language, they sacrifice everything, they work hard, it's negative language. And when I look at my transformation to my years in passion, I'm still working just as hard as ever. I'm still making all the sacrifices. I could even make an argument that because I love it so much, I'm working harder. And I think that's the reason why I really started to excel, because I really enjoyed what I was doing. But you can live the 10,000 hours becoming an expert, sacrificing, working your tail off, just all the negative language. And you contrast that to somebody who spent the same 10,000 hours in a state of passion. The only sacrifice I could have possibly made was to not do exactly what I did. So
that's so powerful, because it ties in line with this thing I believe and I talk about a lot, is that there is no such thing as the work-life balance. That's a fallacy. Last time I checked, when you're working, when you're doing whatever you got going on, you're still living. You're just actively doing something. And when you can understand that concept of everything is life, so I need to start figuring out how to be grateful for the things that I have in my life. It changes everything.
It changes everything. And, we talked briefly the other day about, my baseball career, and I was no different than those Olympians. From the time I was playing T-ball until the time I graduated high school, I wanted to be a Division I baseball player. And I sacrificed, and I mean, ridiculous how obsessed I was. And I go to the tryout. I didn't get a scholarship or anything, and I get cut. Then I go back the next year, and I get cut. And then I was coaching baseball, and the baseball coach from this school called up, and he really woke me up. He said, Mike, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. You can't hit, you can't run, and you can't field, but you've got a golden arm. Have you ever thought about pitching? I need pitchers. So I worked on my pitching as a junior, no less. I walked onto the team, and through some visualization and working really hard, but really having fun, I made the team. And when I made that team, because I had moderated, it wasn't by choice, but I didn't make the team. Because I made the team, I was so grateful, and I just thought, I have everything to gain and nothing to lose now. And I contrasted that, and I was very aware of it. When I look back at my high school baseball career, I don't remember it not being fun, but I don't really necessarily remember it being fun. But the one thing that I remember vividly at age 58, I'm going to be 58 next week, I remember every single error that I ever made. And I contrast that with the 2 years that I played Division I baseball, 2 of the best years of my life, because I was so passionate. And when I made that team, I was not a legitimate Division I player, not even close. But by the time, in just 2 years, because I was so passionate, and because I that drove me to want to be on that field as much as I possibly could. I wasn't great, but I was a legitimate Division I player. And so I've had these experiences throughout my life that have taught me that, but I was just, the elements are, I was so grateful. I moderated, and I was so grateful to make it. And I just had this, whenever you experience true gratitude, that's really a huge element of humility. And I was just humbled to the core. And the same with my climbing career. I mean, I was just so humble after that experience. It's like, 3 years ago, I was at this peak in the Villa Canote in Peru, and nobody had ever skied any of these peaks. And, it's just this beautiful setting, just like Sahama, beautiful setting, beautiful glacier. And we get to this 20,000 foot peak, and it's got all the elements. It's got the danger. It's got the steepness. It's got the adventure, and it's got powder skiing. And we climbed up it and we skied down. And I was walking away from the peak the next day, and I stopped to take a picture. And I was so emotional. I got this message in my mind's ear. It's like, oh my God, I cannot believe that you allowed me to not only look at this peak, but to have the gifts and the ability to climb and ski it. I mean, it humbled me to my core. And that's the way that all of my climbs were. It's like, I can't believe I just did that. It's like, it was humility. And it's really recognizing that gratitude is so important, because a gift unrealized is obviously a gift that you don't have gratitude for. And that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. So as we kind of wind this down, I do have one more question though I want to ask. And that is, you grew up in Aspen. Your family's been in Aspen for a long time. And then you took to skiing and mountaineering. For you, do you think it was, and you talk about seeking out, you talked about how your dad talked about seeking out your gifts, and you found that mountaineering, climbing, and skiing down these peaks was one of the gifts that you were given. But do you feel that it was like a stars aligned for you, in the sense that you were in a place like Aspen that allowed you to hone those skills at a young age? And do you feel that if you were in somewhere else, like Detroit or just somewhere that didn't have the mountains like what Aspen offers, that you would have been able to recognize those same gifts?
Oh, I mean, definitively, I was put into this place for a reason. And it's kind of funny because when you look at what I do, ski mountaineering, I often laugh. One of my mentors, who I never met, but I read his book, he was a famous alpinist from France 50 years ago and 60 years ago, Lionel Terray, and he wrote a book, and he actually titled it Conquistadors of the Useless. And on the surface, I could make a huge argument that what I do is enormously selfish. It really doesn't serve any kind of a purpose. And so that was part of my journey. It was like, okay, I've recognized the gifts, I've leveraged them. And to be honest, the reason why I'm seeking podcasts and the reason why I'm doing public speaking is, what am I supposed to do with this? And I think that there's a practical side to it, because in the process, I also developed a passion to create films. And so I've got a couple of films that I've used. In those films, they are a medium that people can just, at the one end of the spectrum, they can go out and they can live vicariously through what I did. I know that it inspires people. People have a good time going to the movies or watching the movies. On the other side of it, the practicality of it is, I've used those films to raise, hundreds of thousands of dollars for everything from MS to muscular dystrophy to victims of drunk drivers. They've been a tool because of what I did, and because I filmed them, and because I took the time to make the film. It's something that I can offer people to raise money. But I think also that even though it's arguably a selfish and pretty useless activity, it inspires people. And I think that by anytime an athlete or a business person or whatever takes their gifts and leverages them to be the best that they can be, it's a direct manifestation for how much our Creator loves us. And I think that that's probably the most inspiring message that you can send to somebody. And I know that because that's how people respond to all this stuff. If I can develop, some themes, passion versus obsession, and correlate that to people, I'm not suggesting that it's going to allow people to go out and climb and ski the highest peaks in the world, but in whatever they do, it will allow them to achieve their summit. And I always use my CPA career as a great example, because if you're going to talk, you got to walk the talk. And in my CPA career, I've been a CPA for almost 40 years, and I'm no different than any CPA. I look at the benchmarking, I look at the industry standards, and, I'm in business to make money. I got college tuition and everything. So I was really driven by the business side of it. And I came to work one day and I thought, geez, there's just got to be something more to this. And after that many years, I realized I was pretty good at it. I'm not the greatest in the world, but I'm pretty efficient after 35 years. And a client walked in and wrote a check to pay their bill, threw it on the table, and ran out in a huff. And I thought, oh my God, these people, they don't like me. I'm a necessary evil. Then I had another client come in and the next day, and they said, I'm so thankful that you do what you do. And what happened in my mind is, I do accounting, and the people that hire me to do their accounting hate doing accounting as much as anything in their lives. It scares people. When they have to come in and sign their tax returns, it's never easy. They hate it. It's a necessary, it's like going to the dentist. I hate going to the dentist. And I realized I've been given the gift to do this. And I pivoted, and I started to realize that this is a vocation. I'm not creating problems in these people's lives. I'm actually doing something that they don't want to do or they don't know how to do. And it became, more powerful for me than the money. And the way that I express that is, as soon as I stopped counting my own money, I started to make money. And I've parlayed that into the lives of a lot of my clients. And now, just in the last 5 years since I've started this, people actually look forward to coming into the office and talking about their accounting. They're no longer afraid of accounting because they know that I've got their back. And that's a powerful message that you can give to, the house painter in my portfolio, or the handful of billionaires that I do accounting for. It's a really beautiful thing, and it's like, be thankful that you have what you have, and be the best that you can be. Don't be the best ever. That's not the goal. The goal is to be, regardless of what your career is, regardless of where your interests lie, be the best that you can be, and you will transition and find true passion.
Mike, I can't thank you enough. As we start to wrap up, I always like to ask my guests one last question, and that is, what is one lesson that you've learned throughout life, and you're soon to be 58 years, happy birthday, by the way, that you want to share with the listeners?
Well, I think that in life, a lot of people are going to tell you that you can do anything you put your mind to. They're going to tell you if you can dream it, you can do it. And what I've learned is that that's positively not remotely true. But what I've also learned is that if you try to follow your dreams, if you try to do everything, you will end up accomplishing a hell of a lot more than you ever thought you could. So you really have to be realistic, and you just have to try, and you will succeed.
Thank you so much for that. That's an amazing answer. Where can people go to find you, to find your books, your movies, to learn more about you?
Yeah, the book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and the movies are on all the outlets, Google Play, Amazon. You can also get links at my website, skiingeverest.net. And if you go to skiingeverest.net and order a book, I can sign it. I don't obviously have a way to sign books out of Amazon, but I'm excited about it. Writing has become another passion of mine. I'm not giving up my day job to be a writer, but I love it. I'm almost done with a second book, which is a chronology of our historic first American ski descent of an 8,000 meter peak, and all that stuff can be found at skiingeverest.net.
Perfect. For anyone that's looking to get in touch with Mike, I'll make sure to include all those links down below in the show notes. And thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today and sharing your story on the Life Edge podcast.
Well, thank you, because platforms like you have developed it's a vocation. It's helping people, and my goal in life is to leave this planet just a little bit better than before I got here. And you're doing the same thing. So thank you very much.